History teaches us that great empires are rarely conquered. They collapse. But is this a sudden, violent event, or a slow, internal decay? The evidence suggests a repeating pattern. Empires do not simply fall, they rot from within. The very strengths that forge their rise, unmatched military power and economic dominance, often contain the hidden seeds of their own destruction. From the fiscal ruin of Rome to the imperial handover of Britain, we will uncover these historical echoes and see how they resonate with the challenges facing the world's sole superpower today. This is not a prophecy, but a lesson. The fall of Rome is often depicted as a cataclysm of fire and steel, of barbarian hordes overwhelming the legions at the frontier. But this is only the final act of a much longer, quieter tragedy. The invaders did not topple a giant. They merely pushed on a structure that was already hollowed out from within. The real poison was not a foreign sword, but Rome's own coin. This is the denarius, the silver currency that powered the empire. Under the first emperor, Augustus, in 14 AD, it was a coin of integrity, struck from 95 to 98% pure silver. For centuries, it was the most trusted currency in the known world. But by the year 260 AD, under emperors like Gallienus, this is what the denarius had become. A bronze core with a thin, deceptive silver wash containing less than 5% precious metal. This was not an accident, it was policy. A hidden and ruinous tax enacted by emperors to fund a military that had grown far too vast for its tax base to support. Once Roman expansion ceased, the flow of conquered wealth stopped, but the immense cost of defending thousands of miles of border remained. The state was caught in a military fiscal trap, and it chose to pay its bills by counterfeiting its own money. The consequences were catastrophic. Hyperinflation raged across the empire. Trust in the currency evaporated. A sophisticated market economy collapsed into a primitive system of barter. This economic chaos directly fueled the political anarchy of the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year period of intense civil war where armies, paid in worthless coins, made and unmade emperors at will. In a desperate attempt to stop the spiral, Emperor Diocletian issued his infamous edict on maximum prices in 301 AD. He fixed the price of everything from wheat to labor, with the penalty for violation being death. The result was an immediate disaster. Goods vanished from the markets, creating a thriving black market and crippling shortages. This economic decay had a profound social impact. The state's fiscal crisis favored the rise of massive, slave-run plantations known as latifundia. These mega-farms drove the small, citizen farmer, the traditional backbone of the Roman legions, off his land and into the cities, swelling the ranks of an unemployed mob. The recruiting pool for the army dried up. Rome was forced to rely on mercenaries, men whose loyalty was not to the eagle standards, but to whoever paid them. This created a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. A shrinking tax base and an unreliable army forced the state into ever more desperate currency debasement. The barbarians were not the cause of Rome's fall. They were a symptom of its decay. In the 16th century, a new power rose to become the world's first truly global empire. Spain. Its dominion was built not on fertile farmland, but on mountains of silver and gold, plundered from the New World. Between the years 1000, 500 and 1650, a staggering 180 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver flowed into Spain. It was a river of treasure unprecedented in human history. It should have forged an unbreakable dynasty. Instead, it proved to be a glittering poison. This phenomenon is now known to economists as the resource curse, or Dutch disease. The massive influx of precious metals ignited the price revolution, a century of severe inflation that ravaged Europe but hit Spain the hardest. Suddenly, Spanish-made goods, its textiles, its tools, its wine, were too expensive to compete. It became cheaper for Spaniards to buy clothing from their rivals in the Netherlands than to produce it themselves. Spain's productive economy withered. It became a hollow conduit for wealth, a mere stopover for American silver on its way to the coffers of Dutch, English, and Genoese bankers who financed Spain's ambitions. This decline was accelerated by powerful internal interests. The Mesta, Spain's immensely powerful guild of sheep ranchers, ensured that vast tracts of land were dedicated to grazing rather than agriculture, making the empire dangerously dependent on foreign food. But here lies the central paradox. Despite possessing the world's greatest treasure fleet, the Spanish crown was perpetually, catastrophically bankrupt. The silver was mortgaged before it was even mined, spent on ruinous wars across Europe, from the Netherlands to Italy. To fund these conflicts, the kings signed contracts known as asientos, pre-selling future silver shipments to foreign banking families at a steep discount. This meant the treasure galleons often sailed directly for Antwerp or Genoa, completely bypassing Spain. The debt became so immense that King Philip II was forced to declare state bankruptcy an astonishing 4 times. His default in 1557 is now considered by historians to be the world's first global financial crisis, sending shockwaves through the European economy. The Spanish Empire, which appeared to the world as a colossus of silver and gold, was in reality a fragile giant, built not on treasure, but on a mountain of IOUs. In the 17th century, a small republic of merchants built an empire not of territory, but of trade and finance. The Dutch Republic pioneered modern capitalism. They gave the world its first multinational corporation, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, its first stock market, and its first effective central bank. They were the undisputed masters of a new global economy. But their decline was not a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, painful squeeze, a lesson in the perils of being first. This was the innovator's curse. The Dutch lacked the population of France or the vast resources of Britain. Their sophisticated model was fragile, and their rivals were watching. The English, in particular, took careful notes. Beginning in 1651, Britain enacted the Navigation Acts, a series of laws explicitly designed to break the Dutch monopoly on global shipping. This was not just competition. It was economic warfare, sparking a series of devastating Anglo-Dutch wars. But the most fatal wound was self-inflicted. The Dutch elite underwent a profound transformation. The daring, risk-taking merchants who built the empire were replaced by their descendants, a conservative class of rentiers. Instead of investing in new ships or industries, they chose the safety of lending their vast accumulated wealth. They became bankers to the world, living comfortably off interest payments. In a supreme act of historical irony, one of their biggest clients was the British government. The Dutch were financing the rise of their own replacement. As capital flowed out of the Netherlands, its dynamic edge dulled. The state, meanwhile, was drowning in debt. By the mid-18th century, the core province of Holland had a staggering debt to GDP ratio of over 200%. More than half of all tax revenue was consumed simply by paying interest on past loans. The final rot was hidden deep within the system's heart, the famed Bank of Amsterdam. It was the bedrock of European finance, its reputation built on the absolute promise of holding 100% specie reserves for all deposits. But this was a lie. For decades, the bank had been secretly issuing massive, illegal loans to prop up the failing VOC, the original too-big-to-fail corporation. When this scandal was finally exposed in the 1,790 seconds, trust evaporated overnight. The pillar of Dutch finance shattered, and with it, the last vestiges of their golden age. Of all the empires of the past, none offers a more direct or poignant parallel for the United States than the British. Its decline was sealed not in defeat, but in the ruinous cost of victory. In 1914, on the eve of the First World War, Great Britain was the world's banker, its largest creditor nation. By 1945, after a second global conflict, it was the world's largest debtor, owing a colossal sum primarily to the United States. The American Lend-Lease program during the war was not a gift. It was a transaction that required Britain to liquidate its vast overseas investments, the very assets that generated the income for its empire to pay for American war materials. The empire was forced to sell its inheritance to survive. After the war, the crippling Anglo-American loan came with a fatal string attached. Britain had to make the pound sterling fully convertible to the US dollar. The move was a disaster, triggering a catastrophic currency crisis in 1947 and marking the final, irrevocable transfer of global financial power from London to Washington. Compounding this was an internal dynamic known as gentlemanly capitalism. Historians argue that British imperial policy was driven more by the financial interests of the City of London than the needs of its industrial heartland. This left Britain's factories vulnerable and uncompetitive against the rising industrial might of America and Germany. All of these forces culminated in one humiliating event: the Suez Crisis of 1956. This was the empire's public death certificate, when Britain, alongside France and Israel, invaded Egypt to seize the canal. The American response was not military, but financial. President Eisenhower ordered the US Treasury to begin selling its vast holdings of British government bonds. He weaponized the dollar. The run on the pound was immediate and catastrophic, forcing a broken Britain into a humiliating withdrawal. It was a brutal, public demonstration that military power was now subordinate to financial power, and America held the leash. And so, we arrive in the present day, where the echoes of history converge in a single mirror. The United States, it appears, is not an exception to these ancient rules, but a chilling synthesis of them all. We hear the distinct echo of Rome in a global military apparatus of unprecedented scale and cost. Over 750 bases scattered across more than 80 countries, a modern legionary presence funded not by surplus, but by staggering levels of debt. Like the debased denarius of the late empire, the post-1971 American dollar is a fiat currency, an instrument of power whose value rests not on gold, but on faith, a faith that can be questioned. We see the ghost of Spain in the exorbitant privilege of that same dollar. This status allows the nation to run massive, persistent trade deficits, consuming far more than it produces. This has hollowed out its industrial heartland, creating a modern rust belt, an eerie parallel to Spain's manufacturing collapse under its resource curse. The shadow of the Dutch Republic looms over an economy that has become increasingly financialized. Corporate profits are often disconnected from productive enterprise, driven instead by financial engineering. A modern rentier class has emerged, managing vast wealth rather than creating new industries, fueling inequality that rivals the Gilded Age. But it is the echo of Britain that rings the loudest, the most urgent. The United States has completed the same perilous journey, transforming from the world's largest creditor to its largest debtor. With a national debt now exceeding $34 trillion, held in significant part by strategic rivals, Britain's Suez Crisis is no longer a historical footnote, it is a blueprint. It is a warning of a potential moment of truth, where a geopolitical crisis could be met not with armies, but with a calculated, devastating sell-off of American debt. Finally, there is the universal echo that afflicted every empire on its downward slope: the loss of internal cohesion. Deepening political polarization threatens to paralyze the nation, rendering it incapable of addressing these monumental challenges. The final chapter for the United States is not yet written. The warnings, however, are clear, etched in the ruins of history, for all to see.